I want to discuss a little bit about plagiarism, what it is, and how we can think about it as far as when we're looking at writing research, when we're writing papers, and also from an academic viewpoint. Because honestly, it's an easy concept once you've learned it, but it can actually be fairly daunting for the average student, especially as you're starting to write your first papers and are using references and needing to make sure that we're doing that in a way that does not involve plagiarism. We also know for a fact that there are people that should have known better that even in their doctoral dissertations and or research papers have committed plagiarism. So it is important for us to discuss what it is and how to avoid it. So plagiarism's definition, plagiarism includes either presenting someone else's words without quotation marks, even if you cite the source, or presenting someone else's ideas without citing the source. If you plagiarize, your instructor cannot evaluate your understanding of the topic. So there's two ways that we can do this. One, we do a direct quote without quotation marks, even if we cite the source, or we present someone else's ideas without citing it. And the assumption is, even if the paper makes it clear it's not your work, if you don't cite it, where is it coming from? The assumption is it's coming from you. And that's where it becomes plagiarism. So when we think about plagiarism, let's start with this definition. So why is this such a big deal? Intellectual property is basically theft. Citing acknowledges the information source and not how the information is originally conveyed. Copying how the information is originally conveyed is taking someone else's hard work and passing it off as your own. Plagiarism is intellectual property theft. It's also, we look at, when we're looking at a paper, we're trying to measure your critical thinking. When writing, you want to make it clear that you understand the source and you can think critically about it and put it in your own terms. If you plagiarize, the reader are likely to believe either that you did not understand or could not think critically about the source. So again, we want to think about when we're writing a paper, we're doing two things. We want to avoid intellectual property theft, but we also want to communicate that we're critically thinking. So types of plagiarism, and this is again an area of debate, but basically intentional copying a friend's work is definitely plagiarism. Buying or borrowing other papers or using your own previous papers is plagiarism. You can plagiarize yourself. If you wrote a paper for another class and you simply turn it back into a new class, that is technically self-plagiarism. Cutting and pasting text from other sources without giving citations. Also using ChatGPT or one of the various AI programs to do your work for you. It should be noted that we are using in most of our classes these days a detector of AI generated information, so I would avoid using that as well. Unintentional can include just poor documentation, losing track of citations, careless paraphrasing, though this can also be intentional. So if someone is actually charged with plagiarism, often they will try to claim it was unintentional, that it was due to a mistake, not intentional. But honestly, academic policies and university policies generally do not make a distinction, especially in student classes. If there's plagiarism, it's going to be treated as intentional plagiarism. All plagiarism, intentional or unintentional, will be treated the same at the level that you're currently at. And generally, it only will actually change if you are, shall we say, a little bit more rich and famous and are accused of plagiarism. That's when we may find lawyers getting involved and the unintentional versus intentional being argued. But at the end of the day, the results are the same. Plagiarism is plagiarism. People have probably plagiarized if they have included other words or ideas in their work without citation. They didn't really understand a source, but wrote about it anyway. They couldn't think of any other way to say what the original author said, but they don't put it in actual quotation marks. This is not me telling you that you should put every idea that you take from another source in quotation marks. Actually, that's a fairly boring way to actually do things, and it's generally intellectually dishonest. Again, it doesn't tell us that you are understanding or critically thinking about it. That's not to say that occasionally a direct quote is appropriate. There are some times where something was said very eloquently where we'd want to do a direct quotation. But most of the time, we're actually going to paraphrase what was found in the original source article with citation to allow people to know that's where we got that information from. How to avoid plagiarism. When paraphrasing from the source, at the very least, students should change the wording, sentence syntax, and order of ideas presented in the paper. Ideally, the student will integrate ideas with multiple sources while providing critical commentary on the topic in a way that clearly identifies whether the words and ideas are those of the student or from another source. So what this basically means is that a lot of papers that are being turned in at academic institutes are actually being turned into a program called turnitin.com. Turnitin.com will basically ping plagiarism if all you're doing is adding a couple adjectives to someone else's work. You do not want to take someone's sentence and just change a few things about it. It will probably still ping as plagiarism. You want to read the full paper, think about it, critically think about it, and then put the ideas into your own terms, in your own words, to help support whatever you're actually arguing. That's the best way to actually avoid plagiarism. And then once you're done, make sure that you've cited where these ideas came from. Summarizing versus paraphrasing. Summarizing is reducing a large amount of text to a smaller amount of text, telling the reader what is most relevant about the source. Paraphrasing is communicating another author's ideas without using their words or sentences or structure. Paraphrasing usually does not reduce the amount of text from the source. So also it's a good idea to ask yourself, am I summarizing a large research study into a couple paragraphs, or am I taking one particular small part of a study and paraphrasing it into a similar amount of information for my study? Proper paraphrasing summarizes the original source using different language, phrasing, and sentence structure than the original source. Improper paraphrasing can be plagiarism. And again, what I often see is someone will take a paragraph from an existing article and just change a few things. They may take a sentence and reverse the order. They may add a couple adjectives. If you find yourself doing this, please stop. Instead, go back to the original, read the paragraph that you're wanting to paraphrase, think about it, and put it into your own words. It's not that hard, and it avoids plagiarism. So an incorrect paraphrase. Source. In research writing, sources are cited for two reasons: to alert readers to the source of your information and to give credit to the writers from whom you have borrowed words or ideas. An improper form, paraphrase. In research writing, we cite sources for a couple of reasons: to notify readers of our information sources and to give credit to those who have been borrowed from. So notice that we've changed a few things here. Words and ideas became from. We've moved a few things around, but this really isn't putting it into our own words. We're just taking the original citation, and to avoid having to put a basically quotation marks around it, we've just changed a few things. That is not a good example of what we're wanting to look for when we paraphrase. Correct paraphrase. In research writing, sources are cited for two reasons: to alert readers to the sources of your information and to give credit to writers from whom you've borrowed your words or ideas. So again, thinking about this and put it into your own words. Researchers cite their sources to ensure their audiences know where the information came from and to recognize and credit the original work. Hacker 1995. That would be a good paraphrase. Not only does it put it into completely different words, it's a different syntax, it also cites where the original idea came from. And even though it's paraphrased, it still must be cited or it's plagiarism. We still need to tell people where this information is coming from. So be careful with paraphrasing. Students are still plagiarizing, not paraphrasing, if they're using the author's original sentences, sentence structure, and just changing the words. Avoid plagiarizing by taking notes on the source material. Don't ever copy and paste and then use as a placeholder. So that's where a lot of quote unquote unintentional plagiarism happens. A lot of people will try to defend what happened and say, well, I copied and pasted the original material and I was intending to paraphrase, I just never got back to it. Generally speaking, after you read something, wait a day or so and then put it into your own words. Convey the information in your own words using your own voice, looking only at your notes. Don't look back at the original article. And then also summarize instead of paraphrasing. Summarizing a study's methods or results into a sentence or two is a lot easier to do than paraphrasing a specific section. Think of writing one sentence about at least one paragraph, not writing one sentence per sentence. So again, think about the fact that summarizing is usually a lot easier to not plagiarize than paraphrasing. So if you are going to do quotes in scientific writing is rare. This is only done when the writer wants to convey how something is said, not what is said. The writer must make it clear that the original wording is critical to the argument. In some cases, you're allowed to quote, and in some cases, you're not. In my classes and in most classes, usually you want to avoid using more than one quote in your paper. And I recommend that generally you avoid using quotations. Think about if you're going to quote something, it should really be there's no other way to say it, or the way it was said was so impactful that it needs to be repeated. As far as citing, direct readers to the sources to support your statements. Cite anything that is not your own data or theory. So example, combat veterans can take MAOI's, Salisbury and Bunker 2001, or or I can't even pronounce that, but aripiprazole, Lambert 2005, to treat the sleep disturbances associated with PTSD. So this is one sentence, but it involves two different studies that basically found support for two different substances that can actually affect sleep disturbances. And we'd want to cite both of those. So generally, you don't want to get so worried about citation that you're citing everything and anything, but at the same time, generally more citation is better than less. And what you're also wanting to do beyond avoiding plagiarism is you're wanting to do credit, but you're also wanting to direct readers, if I wanted to know more about these, so all I have in your study in this example is one sentence. What if I really wanted to know, what do they find about MAOIs and its relation to sleep disturbance? I now know where to go. I can use the citation to look up the reference, go to the reference section, and then look up that original article if I want to learn more. So mechanics of APA style citing at the end of your statement in parentheses, there's basically two ways to cite things. The first one is that you give the information followed by the author or authors and the date of the study. The other one is to actually start out with the name of the subject in the sentence. So for example, the first one, four conditions must be met for intergroup contact to reduce bias, Alport 1954. Or Alport in 1954 was the first one to discuss that four conditions of contact must be met for intergroup contact to reduce bias. And again, we see the two different ways. If you quote, you'll not only need the citation and the author and year, but also the page number. So for example, Alport 1954 called James's study of dolphin clicks, quotation marks, the seminal work in research on animal communication, quotation marks, and then the page number, page 152. Or James' study of dolphin clicks is sometimes considered the seminal work in research on animal communication, Alport 1954, page 152. So summary. Summarizing is a large part of information into your own words. Paraphrasing is usually second best. So generally we want to summarize if possible. We want to take a large amount of information and summarize it into a smaller amount of information. When we're paraphrasing, we're taking basically 5 or 6 sentences and paraphrasing them into our own words in 5 or 6 sentences. This is usually a little bit more dangerous when we're thinking about plagiarism. Make sure that no matter what you're doing, you're writing in your own voice using your own words. Cite all sources in the text and then include those references at the end of your paper. And to be good, here's my references from the following, including if for any reason you're interested in those studies on PTSD, here's the citations and how they'd be cited in APA style. And again, here's that Alport study and that Hackers study when we're talking about various places that we got information for this particular set of slides.